The building was already quiet when the janitor unlocked the side door. Evening classes had ended and most of the students had gone home. The smell of sweat and cleaning spray hung in the air. The lights were dim, but the training mat still held the warmth of the day. This place was more than a dojo. It was where people came to test themselves, to feel strong, to belong. The janitor moved slowly, pushing his cart across the floor. He had done this job for years. Every night, the same routine. Sweep the mats, wipe the mirrors, empty the bins, lock the doors. He worked in silence, not because he was shy, but because he had learned long ago that silence kept life simple. When people didn't notice you, they didn't ask questions. Most students barely looked at him. Some nodded politely. Others stepped around him like he was part of the wall. A few younger students whispered jokes, not out of cruelty, but thoughtlessness. He never reacted. He just kept cleaning, his movements smooth and steady, like someone who understood rhythm. On this particular evening, the mood in the dojo felt different. Earlier that day, word had spread that a visiting black belt would be joining the class. Not just any black belt, but someone known in local circles. He had trophies, stories, and a loud presence. People said he trained hard and fought harder. They also said he didn't like to lose. When the class started, the janitor stayed in the background, cleaning the changing area. He could hear the sounds through the walls. Feet sliding on mats. Sharp breaths. The snap of uniforms. The instructor's calm voice giving commands. Everything felt familiar. Almost comforting. Then another voice cut through the room. Louder, rougher, confident in a way that demanded attention. The janitor paused for a moment, his hand resting on the mop handle. He had heard that voice before, years ago, in places he no longer visited. His face stayed calm, but his eyes changed slightly, as if an old memory had been stirred. The visiting black belt took control of the room quickly. He corrected students without being asked. He laughed when someone lost balance. He sparred too hard, pushing people back with force that went beyond training. A few students looked toward the instructor, unsure if this was normal. The instructor watched closely, but said nothing at first, perhaps wanting to see where things would go after class ended. Students sat along the wall, breathing hard and talking quietly. Some looked excited. Others looked uncomfortable. The visiting black belt paced the mat, clearly enjoying the attention. He talked about his fights, his wins, his strength. He spoke as if the room existed only to listen. That was when he noticed the janitor. The man was wiping the edge of the mat, careful not to disturb anyone. He kept his eyes down, focused on his work. The black belt stopped talking mid-sentence. "Hey," he said, pointing. "What's with this guy cleaning while we're still here?" A few students shifted uncomfortably. The instructor replied calmly that it was normal and that the janitor had been working there a long time. The black belt smirked. "Looks like he's been here too long." Some people laughed nervously. The janitor didn't react. He moved his cloth in slow circles, as if he hadn't heard a thing. The black belt walked closer. "Do you ever train?" he asked, his tone half joking, half mocking. The janitor straightened up. He looked at the man, meeting his eyes for the first time that night. His face was plain, calm, almost unreadable. "Not anymore," he said quietly. That answer seemed to amuse the black belt even more. "Not anymore," he repeated, laughing. "So you used to be tough." The janitor didn't reply. He simply returned to cleaning. Something about that silence annoyed the black belt. He turned to the room. "You see this?" he said. "This is what happens when people quit. They end up cleaning floors for fighters." The laughter was thinner this time. A few students looked down. One of the younger ones glanced at the janitor, then quickly away. The instructor finally stepped forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Show respect." The black belt raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax. Just having some fun." But his eyes stayed on the janitor. As the room slowly cleared, the janitor continued working. His hands moved with practiced ease. He knew when to step aside, when to move forward. He could sense the space around him, the way someone senses a room after years of habit. It wasn't something he thought about. It was just there. The visiting black belt lingered, stretching clearly in no rush to leave. He watched the janitor for a while, as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't like. "You know," he said finally, "I spar anyone. Beginners, advanced, doesn't matter." The janitor nodded once, not looking up. The black belt stepped closer again. "Ever been hit?" The janitor paused. For a brief second, the room felt very still. Then he spoke, his voice even. "A long time ago?" That answer landed differently. The black belt's smile faded just a little. "You sound like you think you're special." "I don't," the janitor said. "I just clean." The black belt scoffed. "Funny thing about people like you," he said. "Always acting humble." Janitor finished wiping the mat and stepped back. He placed the cloth on his cart carefully. His movements were neat, controlled. Nothing wasted. From the corner of the room, the instructor watched, sensing the tension building like a storm that hadn't broken yet. He considered stepping in again, but something held him back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange calm in the janitor's posture. The black belt rolled his shoulders. "Tell you what," he said loudly. "One round. Friendly spar. Let's see if the floor cleaner remembers anything." The room went quiet. The janitor looked around. A few students had stopped at the door, frozen. The instructor opened his mouth to speak, but the janitor gently raised a hand. "No," said. That single word surprised everyone. The black belt laughed, sharp and loud. "Of course not." The janitor met his eyes again. There was no anger there. No fear either. Just something steady, something deep. "I'm here to work," he said. "Not to prove anything." The black belt stared at him for a moment, then shook his head. "Figures." He grabbed his bag and headed for the door, still muttering under his breath. As he left, he threw one last look over his shoulder, a look that promised this wasn't finished. The janitor waited until the door closed. Then he exhaled slowly, a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He returned to his cart and continued cleaning, just as he had every night before. But the room felt different now. The instructor watched him quietly, question forming in his mind. He had seen many fighters over the years. Strong ones, fast ones, loud ones. But there was something about the janitor's stillness that stayed with him long after the lights were turned off. Outside, the night air was cool. Inside, the mats shone under the dim lights. The janitor finished his work, locked the doors, and walked away, carrying a past no one in that dojo could yet imagine. The next evening, the dojo was full again. The same students returned, their uniforms crisp, their shoes lined neatly outside. The janitor arrived earlier this time, carrying his cleaning cart, as always. His routine was unchanged, but something felt different. The air seemed thicker, as if people were holding their breath for something they couldn't see yet. Students laughed and joked among themselves. But there were still whispers about yesterday. Many had watched the black belt leave with a scowl, muttering about the janitor. No one could stop talking about the way the janitor had simply stood there, calm and unshaken, while the arrogant visitor tried to provoke him. Some students were curious. Others were nervous. The instructor walked quietly, giving orders, observing, trying to keep things normal. The janitor moved along the mats, wiping away dust and sweat from earlier classes. Every now and then, he would pause to pick up a dropped belt or adjust a corner of the mat. His movements were deliberate, steady, and almost unnoticed. But there was a rhythm to them that suggested more than just cleaning. Years of practice, years of control, showed in each step. Then the door opened, and the black belt returned. He came in alone, carrying his bag over his shoulder, his posture confident. The room felt smaller instantly. Some students looked at the janitor, then quickly looked away. Others whispered to each other. The tension was visible, almost electric. The black belt walked straight to the center of the mat, dropping his bag loudly. He clapped his hands, getting everyone's attention. "I told my friends about this place," he said. "About the floor cleaner who thinks he's untouchable? I want to see it for myself." The room was silent. The instructor's eyes narrowed, but he stayed quiet. He had seen arrogance before. He had also seen humility. But something about this situation felt different. There was no open hostility from the janitor, no challenge in his eyes, just calm observation. The black belt circled the janitor slowly. "Ever sparred with someone like me?" he asked. "Strong, fast, disciplined?" The janitor continued wiping the floor. "I've sparred with many," he said. His voice was soft but firm. "I don't spar anymore." The black belt laughed loudly. "Not anymore?" "Funny excuse. People quit and get weaker. That's what happens." "You think cleaning floors keeps you strong?" Some students laughed nervously. A few younger ones looked scared. They had heard stories about this black belt's skill and temper. The instructor stepped closer to the janitor, but the man raised a hand gently, shaking his head. He didn't want any help. He wanted this moment to pass naturally. The black belt leaned closer, his face inches from the janitor's. "Why are you so calm? Afraid, or are you hiding something?" The janitor paused, setting the cloth down. He looked up directly at the black belt. There was no fear, no aggression. Only a quiet strength that came from years of discipline. "I'm not afraid," he said simply. "I don't need to hide anything." The black belt's smirk faded slightly. He tilted his head, studying him, as if trying to read a puzzle that had no answer. "Then why not show me? 1 round." "Just for fun." The janitor shook his head. "I'm here to work, not to fight." The black belt laughed louder this time and clapped his hands. "You know what? That's fine. But I like to push boundaries." "You ever been pushed too far?" A few students glanced at each other nervously. They sensed something was about to happen. The instructor's hands twitched, ready to step in if needed. But the janitor stayed calm, his body relaxed, his eyes steady. The black belt moved closer again, invading the janitor's space. He poked at his shoulder lightly, testing, teasing. "Come on, just 1 round." "I won't hurt you." The janitor sighed and shook his head. "I told you, I don't spar." The black belt laughed, throwing his head back. "You're missing out, old man." Students were holding their breath. Some wanted the janitor to fight. Some wanted the black belt to leave. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Then, without warning, the black belt pushed a young student lightly, more to demonstrate his strength than to harm. The student stumbled, almost falling, and the janitor's head turned slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. He didn't move yet, but the room seemed to notice the shift. The black belt laughed at the student, not even noticing the subtle change. "See? Weakness everywhere. You all need guidance. Maybe you need me." The instructor finally stepped forward, raising a hand. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Respect is part of this dojo." The black belt waved him off. "Relax, teacher. I'm just showing the difference between strength and floor cleaning." The janitor continued cleaning, moving methodically. But there was a quiet intensity in his actions. Every step, every movement was precise. The way he picked up a dropped belt, the way he adjusted the corner of the mat, the way he bent to pick up a small piece of trash, everything was measured. Every student watching could feel it, even if they didn't understand why. Finally, the black belt grew impatient. "You talk too much," he said, stepping closer. "I want to see what you've got. Just 1 strike. 1 counter. I dare you." The janitor stopped for a moment. He looked up at him directly. "I don't need to prove anything to you." The black belt laughed, shaking his head. "Typical. Humble. Weak. That's fine. But you'll remember this. Mark my words." He turned and walked to the edge of the mat, pacing. The students could see the frustration in his movements. He expected confrontation, resistance, maybe even fear. Instead, he found calm, quiet, steady observation. The janitor's silence was louder than any words. Time passed. The black belt finally left the dojo that night, but the tension remained. Students whispered about what had happened. Some tried to guess what the janitor's past might have been. Others felt a strange respect, though they didn't know why. The instructor finally exhaled, looking at the janitor. "You didn't have to do anything," he said quietly. The janitor nodded. "Sometimes doing nothing is the strongest action." He continued his cleaning, finishing the mats, the mirrors, and the corners. When he was done, he locked the doors and walked into the night, calm and steady, leaving behind a room full of students who had just witnessed a quiet lesson in strength, patience, and control. And though they didn't know it yet, they would all remember this night for a long time. The following week, the dojo was filled with anticipation. Students whispered quietly among themselves as they warmed up. Everyone seemed aware of a tension that hadn't existed before. The visiting black belt was scheduled to return, and the memories of the previous encounters lingered in the air. No one could predict what would happen, but everyone could feel that something was about to unfold. The janitor arrived early, as always. His routine had not changed. He wheeled in his cart, set up his cleaning supplies, and began methodically wiping down the mats. There was an almost meditative rhythm to his work, each movement precise, each step calculated. He didn't rush, didn't pause unnecessarily, and didn't glance at the students. Yet, the students watched him closely, almost sensing that there was more to him than met the eye. As the black belt walked through the door later that evening, he carried a confident grin and a swagger that demanded attention. He tossed his bag aside and began stretching in the center of the mat, his eyes scanning the room. The whisper stopped. All eyes were on him. "You all remember me," he said, voice booming. "And I remember you, especially the janitor. Floor cleaner, or should I say, the man too afraid to spar." Some students laughed nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably. The instructor remained quiet, his eyes flicking between the two men. He knew that this encounter could go in any direction. He wanted to see what would happen. The black belt's gaze landed on the janitor, and a smirk formed on his face. He walked slowly across the mat, circling the man like a predator assessing its prey. "You know," he said, "you don't have to hide behind a mop. 1 round. That's all I'm asking. Let's see what you've got." The janitor kept his eyes on the mat, not reacting immediately. Then he slowly straightened, set his cloth aside, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I'm not here to prove anything to you." The black belt laughed, loud and harsh. "Funny, you act like humility is a shield. It won't save you if you step onto the mat." The room went silent. The students held their breath, unsure if they wanted the confrontation to happen or not. They had seen the black belt's strength before. They had also seen the janitor's calm composure. Both were powerful in their own ways. The black belt moved closer, stopping just a few feet away. "You're not even afraid," he said, noting the steady gaze of the janitor. "That's unusual. Most people would be shaking. Most people would run. Not you." The janitor's eyes met his directly. "Fear is a choice," he said quietly. "I choose not to let it control me." The black belt's smirk faltered slightly. He had faced many opponents in his life, but there was something different about this man. Something he couldn't measure or challenge with raw strength alone. Then, without warning, the black belt pushed a student lightly, more to demonstrate his power than to harm. The student stumbled, catching himself on the mat. The janitor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of attention passing over him. He didn't move immediately, but the energy in the room shifted. Something invisible seemed to settle over the mat. The black belt laughed, enjoying the display, but he didn't notice the subtle shift in the janitor's posture. The man's body was relaxed, but there was a quiet alertness in the way he held himself. Every student in the room could feel it, even if they couldn't understand it. The janitor was ready. Not angry, not aggressive, just ready. Suddenly, the black belt lunged forward, aiming to lightly tap the janitor's shoulder as a mock challenge. In a split second, the janitor moved. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with precise timing. He stepped aside, barely shifting, and the black belt's hand met only empty space. The students gasped, and some stumbled back, unable to comprehend what they had just seen. The black belt froze, eyes wide. He had expected resistance, maybe fear, maybe hesitation. He hadn't expected this. He tried again, this time moving to strike the janitor's midsection. Again, the janitor shifted just enough, his movement measured and fluid, avoiding contact effortlessly. The dojo felt like it had slowed. Every movement was sharp, deliberate, controlled. The students were frozen in place, unable to look away. They had never seen anything like this. The black belt, usually so dominant, was now on the defensive. His confidence wavered, and a flicker of disbelief crossed his face. The janitor's movements were quiet, almost minimal, yet they were enough to counter every strike. He didn't hit hard, didn't push, didn't make noise, but the power in his control was undeniable. He guided the black belt's movements without force, using leverage and timing rather than aggression. It was clear to everyone watching that this was no ordinary janitor. The black belt tried to regain control, attacking faster, swinging harder, moving unpredictably. The janitor adjusted each time, reading him like an open book, countering effortlessly. The room was silent, except for the sounds of footsteps on mats and the sharp breathing of the participants. The students could hardly believe what was happening. The janitor wasn't just avoiding strikes. He was guiding the black belt's attacks, using them to expose weaknesses without harming him. Finally, the black belt paused, chest heaving, sweat forming on his forehead. He looked at the janitor with a mix of shock and respect. You know what you're doing?" he said, voice strained. The janitor nodded slightly. "I've trained long enough to know that strength alone is not enough. Control, timing, and patience matter more than power." The black belt took a step back, his ego bruised but his respect growing. He realized that this man, whom he had dismissed as a simple janitor, possessed skills and discipline far beyond his own. He was humbled, though not completely willing to admit it yet. The instructor stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on the black belt's shoulder. "That's enough for now," he said. "You've seen what I see every day. Skill is more than strength. Respect is more than winning." The black belt exhaled, straightened his uniform, and nodded reluctantly. He looked at the janitor again, this time with genuine recognition. The students, still in awe, slowly returned to their corners, whispers filling the room. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a lesson in mastery that went beyond physical strength. The janitor returned to his cleaning, moving as if nothing had happened. Each step was calm, deliberate, controlled. He finished his work without haste, without display, without needing acknowledgement. The room felt different now, charged with a new understanding. The black belt humbled, collected his bag, and left quietly, leaving behind a dojo transformed by a quiet demonstration of true skill. The instructor watched the janitor, question forming in his mind. He had seen many fighters over the years, but none had displayed the quiet power, patience, and the control that the janitor had shown tonight. This was more than skill. This was wisdom earned over a lifetime. As the janitor locked the doors and stepped into the night, he carried with him the calm certainty of someone who had proven, without arrogance, the strength of true mastery. The students left the dojo that evening, talking in hushed tones, sharing what they had just witnessed. And though the janitor walked away quietly, his actions that night would linger in their minds for years to come, a lesson in control, humility, and the power of restraint. The following day, the dojo felt different. The students arrived with whispers still on their lips, replaying last night's events in their minds. Some couldn't believe what they had seen, while others were filled with awe. The instructor had given the class a brief lecture about discipline, control, and respect, but it hardly captured the depth of what had happened. Everyone's attention, consciously or not, was drawn to the janitor, who moved through the dojo with his usual, quiet purpose. He was finishing his morning cleaning when one of the students approached him. The boy, timid but curious, asked, "Are you really a fighter? I mean, before?" The janitor looked at him, calm and measured, eyes steady. "I trained for a long time," he said, "but that part of my life is over." The boy's eyes widened. "Why? Why leave? You could be amazing. You could win anything." The janitor paused for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Winning is not everything," he said softly. I learned that strength means nothing if it is not paired with humility, patience, and respect. There comes a time when you must walk away and find other ways to live." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. The janitor continued his work, wiping down the mats as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet, in the silence of his actions, the weight of his story lingered. Later that evening, the black belt returned, more serious than before. There was no swagger, no arrogance. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the janitor with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. He had been humbled, and the experience had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "You have skill," the black belt said, as he walked toward the center of the mat. "I've never seen anything like it." "But who are you really?" The janitor continued cleaning, bending to pick up a small piece of dust without looking up. "I told you," he said, calm and firm. "I am who I am now. That is enough." The black belt's gaze hardened. "No, I need to know. You can't move like that without years of training. You could fight professionally. You could dominate tournaments. Why hide it?" The janitor paused and finally looked up, his eyes meeting the black belt's. "I have seen what winning and losing really mean," he said quietly. "I have seen people change when they chase victory too hard. I have seen lives broken, friends lost, and respect discarded. I chose another path." The black belt stared, struck by the depth of the words. "Another path?" He repeated. "Yes," the janitor said. "A path where strength is measured by self-control, not trophies. Where skill is a tool for peace, not for proving oneself. I chose to live quietly, to work humbly, to help others where I can. That is enough for me." The black belt was silent. He had expected resistance, a fight, or even arrogance. What he found instead was wisdom, calm, and quiet power. It unsettled him. But he could not deny the truth in the janitor's words. Some students watched from the corners, trying to understand the exchange. The instructor stepped closer, sensing the tension, yet also feeling a rare moment of clarity. The janitor, once underestimated, had revealed more than his skill. He had revealed a philosophy, a life lived intentionally, without the need for recognition. The black belt finally spoke again, his voice quieter. "You could be famous. People would respect you. They would fear you. Why give that up?" The janitor smiled faintly, not proudly, but gently. "Respect is not given by fear. It is earned by actions, by patience, by what you do when no one is watching. Fame and fear are fleeting. What lasts is what you carry inside." For the first time, the black belt considered the weight of his own choices. He had fought for trophies, for attention, for respect in the eyes of others. He had rarely thought about what it all meant. Watching the janitor, he realized there was another kind of strength, quieter, deeper, and far more powerful. The students, inspired, began to see the janitor in a new light. The man who cleaned the floors, who quietly moved through their space, was not weak. He had chosen restraint over aggression, wisdom over display, humility over pride. The lesson was clear. Power without discipline was empty. Skill without control was dangerous. And true mastery was as much about the mind and heart as it was about the body. The black belt nodded slowly, almost to himself. "I underestimated you," he admitted. The janitor returned to his cleaning, setting down the cloth and continuing his work. "Most do it first," he said. "It is not unusual. It is what you do after that matters." The instructor watched quietly, understanding the magnitude of what had occurred. He had seen many skilled fighters in his life, but none had brought such clarity and quiet strength into his dojo. He knew this lesson would stay with every student who had witnessed it. Later, after the class ended, students lingered near the mats, talking in low voices. Some tried to imagine the janitor's past life, the tournaments he might have won, the battles he might have fought. Others focused on the lesson itself, the power of restraint, the meaning of humility, and the quiet strength that had been on display. The black belt left without fanfare that evening, his mind occupied with thoughts he had not expected to confront. For the first time, he felt a kind of respect that had nothing to do with strength or victory. He had faced someone who had taught him more than any fight ever could, The janitor finished his cleaning, locking the doors, and stepped into the night with the same quiet determination he had always carried. He walked calmly, a man who had chosen his life deliberately, who had proven that mastery was not about winning, but about living with intention, humility, and control. And in the dojo, the story of the janitor spread quietly. Students shared the tale, not as gossip, but as a lesson. They spoke of the calm man who had moved like a shadow, who had faced arrogance without anger, and who had taught them that true strength often lay in what was unseen. The lesson was deeper than any technique, more lasting than any trophy, and it would stay with them far longer than the echoes of the black belt's footsteps. The dojo was unusually quiet that evening. Students arrived with a sense of anticipation and respect that had not been there before. Word of the janitor's quiet demonstration had spread, and everyone seemed to understand that tonight would be different. The air carried a weight of expectancy, as if the mats themselves remembered the events of the past days. The janitor arrived first, as always. He wheeled in his cleaning cart and began his work, methodical and calm. His movements were precise, almost meditative, as he wiped down the mats and adjusted the corners. The students watched him in awe. They had seen him move before, but now they understood the depth of his skill and discipline. There was a quiet strength in his presence that filled the room without words. When the black belt entered, he was silent, carrying a bag, but no swagger this time. His eyes met the janitor's, and there was no smirk, no arrogance. There was only acknowledgement. He had come not to dominate or provoke, but to witness and perhaps learn. He had been humbled, and though he had not admitted it out loud, he was curious. The instructor nodded at the black belt, allowing him to stand in the center of the mat. "Tonight," he said, "we will see more than technique. We will see the meaning of discipline, respect, and control." The students settled along the edges, their eyes fixed on the two men. Some whispered, some held their breath, but all were captivated. There was a quiet tension, a sense that something important was about to unfold. The black belt took a step forward. "I want to understand," he said quietly. "I have seen your skill, but I want to know how you carry it with such calm, how you turn strength into restraint." The janitor paused, setting down his cleaning cloth. "It comes from knowing what truly matters," he said softly. "I have fought. I have won. I have lost. I have seen people change because of what they chase. I chose a different path." The black belt nodded, listening intently. "And what is that path?" The janitor looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the students. "A path where skill is used with purpose, not for pride. Where control matters more than power. Where humility is a shield, not weakness. Where respect is given freely, not demanded. This is what I chose. This is what I live by every day." The students absorbed his words, feeling their weight. They had learned techniques and forms, but this was different. This was a lesson in life, not just in martial arts. They realized that true strength was not measured by victories or trophies, but by patience, discipline, and integrity. The black belt stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have fought many opponents, some as skilled as you, but I have never faced someone who moves with such precision without aggression. You have taught me something I did not know I needed to learn." The janitor smiled faintly, not with pride, but with understanding. "Learning is a lifelong journey," he said. "We are students as long as we live. Strength is not just in the body. It is in the mind, in the choices we make, and in the restraint we show." The instructor watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had guided many students, but none had left such a profound mark on the dojo as the janitor had. The black belt, once brash and overconfident, now stood in quiet respect. Humbled by the simple truth of his words, the students slowly began to speak among themselves, sharing their thoughts and insights. They talked about the lesson in restraint, the power of calm, and the importance of humility. They discussed how strength without control could be dangerous, and how skill without purpose was meaningless. The dojo, once filled with the sounds of practice and instruction, was now filled with quiet reflection. The black belt finally spoke, his voice steady. "I underestimated you," he said. "Not your skill alone, but your wisdom. You have shown me that true mastery is not about dominating others, but about controlling oneself. I am grateful for this lesson." The janitor nodded, returning to his cleaning as though the conversation had never happened. His actions were simple, deliberate, and calm. Yet in those actions, the students and the black belt could see the embodiment of his philosophy. Every step, every movement, every decision was measured and intentional. As the class ended, the instructor gathered the students. "Remember this," he said. "Strength is not measured by power alone. Skill is not measured by victories. True mastery is in restraint, humility, and respect. Let this lesson guide you in your practice and in your life." The students left the dojo slowly, carrying the weight of the lesson with them. Some replayed the janitor's movements in their minds, imagining the precision and calm control. Others thought about the black belt's transformation. Realizing that respect and humility were as important as skill, the janitor finished his work, locking the doors, and stepped into the night. The street was quiet, the air cool, but he moved with the same calm determination he had shown in the dojo. He had not sought recognition, nor had he desired praise. His actions had spoken louder than words, teaching lessons that would last far longer than any shout or strike. And in the dojo, the story of the janitor spread quietly. Students spoke of him not as a man who cleaned floors, but as a teacher of life, a guide of discipline, and a master of control. The black belt carried the memory of that night with him. Humbled and inspired, knowing that strength was not just in the body, but in the mind and heart as well, the dojo, once a place of training, had become a place of learning in a deeper sense. The janitor's calm presence, his quiet strength, and his deliberate actions had transformed it. And though he returned to his work each night without fanfare, everyone who had witnessed his skill understood the lesson. True mastery is measured not by what is shown, but by the restraint, wisdom, and humility one carries in every action. The dojo was unusually quiet the next morning. A soft sunlight streamed through the windows, falling across the mats, highlighting the faint marks of yesterday's training. The students arrived slowly, each carrying a sense of anticipation that had not existed before. There was a quiet excitement in the air, tempered with respect. The story of the janitor's demonstration had spread. Everyone was curious about what they might learn today. The janitor arrived first, as he always did. He wheeled his cart across the room, setting down cleaning supplies with meticulous care. His movements were deliberate, controlled, and calm. He had done this work countless times, yet there was an effortless grace to the way he handled each task. Students watched him in silence, trying to catch every detail, hoping to understand more about the man whose quiet strength had left such a deep impression. Soon after, the black belt entered. He carried himself differently this time. There was no arrogance in his step, no loud gestures to draw attention. His eyes, however, were focused and serious, reflecting a mix of respect, curiosity, and determination. He had seen the janitor's skill, had felt the weight of the lesson, and now he was ready to understand more. The instructor gathered the students and spoke briefly about the importance of humility and observation. "Today," he said, "we learn not from who wins or loses, but from what we see and how we apply it. Watch closely and let your minds absorb what is happening." The black belt approached the center of the mat. "I want to understand more," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not just your skill, but how you maintain calm under pressure, how you carry yourself without showing arrogance." The janitor looked at him and nodded slightly. "Calm is a choice," he said. "It comes from knowing who you are and what truly matters. Control comes from understanding consequences, and humility comes from experience. None of it is simple, but all of it is within reach if you are willing to learn." The black belt listened, absorbing the words. He had trained for years, fought many opponents, and yet he had never been taught in this way. Skill and strength were important, yes, but they were only part of the equation. The janitor's lesson went deeper, touching aspects of life the black belt had rarely considered. The janitor began his work on the mats, moving slowly and deliberately. The The students watched, seeing the precision in every step, the careful placement of each hand, the way he adjusted the corners of the mats with balance and care. It was simple work, but there was mastery in it. The black belt observed closely, realizing that discipline was not limited to fighting, it extended to every action, every movement, every choice as the day went on. The janitor shared more of his philosophy with the students and the black belt. He spoke of patience, of learning to observe before acting, of the importance of timing and control. He explained that true strength was not about overpowering others, but about understanding oneself and the environment. The students listened intently, asking questions, trying to internalize the lessons. The black belt, who had always relied on aggression and confidence, began to understand the deeper meaning of restraint. During a brief break, the janitor demonstrated a few simple techniques, not to show off, but to illustrate the principles he had spoken about. His movements were fluid, precise, and effortless. Every strike, every step, every shift of weight was purposeful. The black belt and the students watched in silence, absorbing the lesson without distraction. There was no need for competition, no need for applause. The lesson was already clear in the calm power of the janitor's actions. The instructor noticed a change in the black belt. His posture was less rigid, his breathing slower, his eyes softer. The arrogance had been replaced by curiosity and the confidence by a growing respect. The students also began to understand that mastery was not about winning or losing, but about awareness, discipline, and intentional living. The dojo itself seemed to have changed, imbued with a quiet energy that reflected the lessons being taught. Later, the janitor guided a small group of students through exercises designed to teach focus and control. He moved among them silently, correcting posture, demonstrating timing, and offering gentle guidance. The students responded eagerly, absorbing not only the physical skills, but also the underlying lessons of patience, humility, and mindfulness. The black belt watched carefully, occasionally asking questions. Seeking to understand how these principles could be applied to his own life and training, as the day wore on, the janitor shared a story from his past. He spoke of competitions he had once entered, of victories and losses, and of the moments that had taught him the most about himself. He explained why he had chosen to leave that world behind, and how he had discovered that true mastery was about more than skill, it was about character, intention, and the choices one makes every day. The students listened with rapt attention, realizing that the lessons were not only about martial arts, but about life itself. By the end of the day, the black belt approached the janitor. "I understand now," he said quietly. "I have been strong, I have been skilled, but I have not truly understood what it means to master oneself. You have shown me that strength without control is hollow, and skill without purpose is empty. I am grateful for this lesson." The janitor nodded, returning to his work with calm precision. "Learning is never complete," he said. "Every day offers an opportunity to grow, to practice discipline, and to live with intention. Remember that it is not the recognition or the victories that define us, but how we carry ourselves in every moment." The students left the dojo slowly, each carrying the lessons of the day with them. They had witnessed skill, wisdom, and humility all in one person. The black belt stayed a while longer, reflecting on what he had learned. He had come seeking to test others, but instead he had been tested by insight, restraint, and quiet mastery. The janitor finished his work, carefully cleaning every corner of the mats, setting the dojo in perfect order. He locked the doors and stepped into the night, calm and composed, carrying the lessons and experiences of a lifetime with him. The students and the black belt would remember this day, not for a match won or lost, but for the understanding that mastery, strength, and true power came from discipline, humility, and the quiet choices one makes every day.